Anthony, come on up, and hopefully we'll feel excited and energized after your presentation about regulations in California and the petroleum industry.
Yeah, right, excited about regulation. That's a good one. Give me a break. Good morning. Good morning. I know this is going to be let me have this because you guys are you had a nice night last night, obviously, huh? Let's try this again. I come from a military family. Good morning. Good morning. Here we go. Let's see. There's you, there's lunch, and then there's me in the middle. Thank you very much, Tamara. I appreciate that. First and foremost, let me welcome all of you to this auspicious occasion in which we not only learn about energy, but we talk about it. We have our debates about energy, and of course, we attempt to make our lives. I also want to say hello to my colleague, Willie Rivera. He's also a councilman here in the city of Bakersfield. Would you please give him a hand? I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Cody, it's working well. Thank you for the mic. And Tamara, the person who all of you have been asking for, yelling at, and ordering around. How about giving her a hand, because she's taking all of the blame. There we go. My time this morning, I have 2 hours to give you a presentation. Well, it's not 2 hours? That's what I'm contractually obligated for. Okay, fine, no 2 hours then, that's fine. Because time usually reminds me of the story about the Socrates story, as I like to call it. Socrates, as many of you know, was a very wise man. And Socrates lived a very long time ago. One day, Socrates was speaking amongst his friends, and he spoke too long, and his friends killed him. So, I'm glad I have a timer here, and let's talk a little bit about what happened in Sacramento. But the first question I have, and by show of applause, who is actually happy with the results of the presidential election? By a round of applause. Silent majority or the scary majority, okay. Who, by show of applause, if you so dare, are not that excited about the election results at the presidential level? The silent minority, okay, all right. For those of you who are happy, as Pharrell Williams says, be happy. For those of you who are unhappy with the presentation I'm about to present to you, I'd suggest a little bit of Maalox, a couple of Rolaids, strap in, because you're about to hear it. Now, please remember, I am just the messenger. I am just the messenger. I am not the architect of the ads that you saw, nor was I responsible for the millions of dollars that were spent presidential to our legislative races. I'm just your friendly neighborhood CIPA lobbyist, here to provide a little information to you. So, with that, let me provide a little information on what happened at the end of this past session. My remarks will include a recap of the legislative outcomes of 2016, a bit about the recent legislative races, CIPA's direction for next year, and of course, some interesting news about our opposition, the so-called hypocritical, insincere, talking out the side of their mouths, lying, crying foul, just not playing the sandbox activists who call themselves environmentalists. And let me be clear about the reason that we call them activists and not environmentalists. Because my members, California Independent Petroleum Association members, deal with water on a day-to-day basis. They deal with marine life on a day-to-day basis. They deal with ponds, aquifers, groundwater. They deal all with these things on a day-to-day basis. So who's the true environmentalist here? I think my members are. I think all of you are. So, thank you. So how about we not empower those who oppose us, who like to see us go away, by calling them the very thing that you do on a day-to-day basis? They are not environmentalists, they are activists. They are activists on air and water issues. We clear? All right, stay with me now. Stay with me. So when I get to the activists, I will not mention any names. Tom Steyer. I will not mention any names. Center for Diversity, excuse me. I kind of ruin that one every once in a while. But ladies and gentlemen, my job is very simple. My charge is very clear. My job is to do the following: prevent taxes, fees, and overregulation from being a permanent part of a reality for the upstream industry. There are more than 1,000 registered lobbyists who patrol the halls of the Capitol. There are more than 2,000 pieces of legislation that is introduced each year. And there is a mere 120 people who are to decide on all of these things, with the exception of the governor who has the final say by a stroke of the pen. In 2016, there were 1,059 bills that hit his desk. 898 were signed, 159 were vetoed, and 2 bills went into law without the governor's signature. My office was responsible this year for monitoring more than 30 pieces of legislation, 30 pieces of legislative proposals. And we engaged in at least half of them. And for those of you who are not that familiar with the legislative process, what does that mean when we engage a bill? Well, we try to either kill it, stop it somehow, or amend it, which means we try to put certain words on this piece of paper that will less impact the industry. As we went through this process, the bill list became shorter and shorter and shorter, as I hope it does on a year-to-year basis. After the dust was cleared, there were the big 6. 4 had to do with climate change, methane output, GHG emissions, regulatory and legislative oversight, idle wells, as well as penalties. Our outcome this particular year was mixed. But given the opposition from the activist community and the quadrant of left liberal legislators, we made out, for the most part, pretty well. There were 2 bills that impacted CIPA directly. And when the bill was introduced, ladies and gentlemen, it had bad intentions and bad intentions and bad intentions written all over it. Assembly Bill 2927. It was authored by termed out Assemblyman Doss Williams. Bye, Doss. See ya. Now running, or probably became a supervisor in Santa Barbara. Good luck with that. And the bill sought to lower the inventory of idle wells throughout the state of California. The Division of Oil and Gas and Geothermal Resources, DOGGR, viewed idle wells as liabilities. State agency that we pay for each year, that we pay their staff, that were more than 50% of their budget, said that idle wells were in fact a liability. Bit of an oxymoron to me, but who knows? Maybe I get it wrong. So they said idle wells were in fact a detriment. A detriment. We said they were assets. So we disagreed and argued that idle wells, the best way to establish an idle well's existence was proper testing. Proper testing of all wells should be the determining factor whether they remain idle or whether they should be plugged. DOGGR's goal, government's goal, is to see a scheduled abandonment of wells on a percentage basis, on a yearly basis. The agency has a fear that under the current market conditions, more wells will become orphaned and reflect the housing crisis of some 8 years ago. This is when homeowners abandoned homes, left them vacant, and they were used for all types of purposes, be it homelessness, gang activity, unfortunate crimes, and things of that nature. They were afraid that all of these wells would wind up in the same situation. I asked in a meeting, I said, well, if you're concerned about all these wells falling under the same crisis as the housing crisis, maybe we should encourage more production. But who am I? I'm just your friendly neighborhood lobbyist. But again, possibly encouraging more production to keep the very wells that you're concerned about working as opposed to not working. Dogger also sought to change the definition of what an idle well was. For example, their proposal was any well that didn't produce in 24 months. Changing the definition of an idle well could spike the idle well count, and thus spike the wells that operators would be obligated to abandon under what they call the idle well management plan. Overall, after we negotiated the bill does increase oil and gas fees and what they call and blanket indemnity bonds. The government's goal here is to provide a disincentive for operators to hold on to a large number of their assets, their idle wells, and to reduce that well count overall. Because of our negotiation, the bill now defines an idle well as any well that has had at least 24 months or 2 years of not producing oil, natural gas, or water for production purposes, be it stimulation, enhanced oil recovery, or reservoir pressure management. The bill also says that a long-term idle well that has been idle for at least 8 years or more is now constituted as an idle well, a long-term idle well. So you're asking me, how come am I going into this, losing some of you and others saying, let's get to the good part? Well, that's because this particular bill would have put small operators out of business if it would have gone into law in its original form. This bill would have impacted some of your relatives who work in the industry if this bill had gone into law in its original form. And if you thought that bill was bad, strap in and listen to this one. This bill was, in fact, Assembly Bill 2756, a fines bill by Bay Area Assemblyman Tony Thurmond, who ironically has a refinery in his district. Matter of fact, he has 2 refineries in his district. I don't know if Mr. Thurmond walks everywhere. I don't know if Mr. Thurmond bikes everywhere. I think he still drives a car, and I still think that we pay for that car, and he still pumps the gas that goes in the car, the crude that we produce. And again, a bit of an oxymoron, but it is what it is. So I'm trying to give you guys a picture of some of the philosophies that we deal with. I take away personalities, just philosophies that we deal with in the state of California. 2756 would have enforced a $25,000 penalty per day, regardless of the infraction. The Dogger supervisor would have had the authority to force shutdowns of well injections for non-emergency purposes. And per the proponents, that was not their goal. One thing about legislation, ladies and gentlemen, and that is, if it's on the paper, that's what it means. If someone says it doesn't mean something, then you need to change the piece of paper. You need to amend it. So we agreed that the bill should deter bad actors, because look, bad actors hurt everyone, hurts all of us. Irresponsible operators hurt all of us, every one of us. But the lead agency failed to take into consideration the full picture of its proposal and how it would impact the diverse size of the oil and gas industry here in the state of California. We did remove our opposition. We got a tiered system. So basically, if you do a minor violation, it's a minor fine. Medium-sized violation, medium-sized fine. If you're a bad actor, you get the maximum fine. And the governor signed the bill into law. I highlighted these 2 bills because, again, they were 2 pieces of legislation that impacted upstream industry. But it also speaks very clear. the message is very clear. That if, in fact, you want a dialogue and common ground and a constructive feedback on things that impact the oil and gas industry, you're more than willing to have that conversation. But if you choose to go rogue and you want to shove something down the face or the mouths or the throats of this industry, then we're willing to have that conversation and that fight as well. We play a great deal of defense in the state legislature. It's time for us to go on offense. I'll get to that in a second. So the 4 bills that summed up the legislative session, these bills told us a lot. The remaining 4 bills told us a lot. It told us, one, who we can depend on. It also told us who we can't depend on. The votes on these 4 bills that I'm quickly going to go over also identified these so-called moderate Democrats or not. And it also put us in check in a perspective of who are our allies when the heat really comes down. So let's start with the biggie, SB 32. The signature proposal authored by termed out State Senator Fran Pavlik. Bye, Fran. As many of you know, SB 32 was the extension of AB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2006. The bill flew out of Senate Natural Resources Committee as expected, flew out of Appropriations as expected, and flew off the Senate floor as expected in 2015. And then it had some trouble on the Assembly floor. It had some trouble passing the Assembly floor. So when a bill has trouble passing, there's a word called reconsideration. The author is given reconsideration so he or she can wait, attempt to get their ducks in order, bring the bill back for a vote. So what they did in this case is they put the bill back in the committee. Now stay with me on this, ladies and gentlemen. The bill was so important, the bill was so revolutionary that in 2016, this groundbreaking piece of legislation, you know how many committee hearings it had? 0. 0. Not to talk about the impacts on the policy, not to talk about the benefits to society, not to talk about all these things that they were preaching in the press about this being a great piece of legislation. It had 0 committee hearings. And it was such a good bill. It was such an important bill that to get the 41 votes that it needed, passed, it got 42. To get the 41 votes it needed, it was so important that the governor had to make calls. The speaker had to make calls. Kamala Harris, U.S. Senate-elect, former Attorney General, had to make calls. And some guy named Tom Steyer had to walk the halls and remind liberal legislators of his support for them, that SB 32 had to become law. This was so important. It was so important. All of these people had to literally gang up on their own caucus members and literally, now I wasn't in the conversations, and literally promised or promised them that this bill would be good for them to support. You see, let me be very clear. When it comes to the science, when it comes to the facts, when it comes to actually point by point, we clean the clocks of the activists each time. And I say that in all honesty. I would say that in front of them. We clean their clocks, ladies and gentlemen, because the things that I am provided by my membership arm me to the T. And I'm able to articulate it to people who are having hundreds of things running through their little minds in the state legislature. So it literally took the governor, the speaker, a billionaire, and an attorney general to get a revolutionary bill passed. Help me with that one. Someone help me, please, because I don't have the answer. But we move on. Here's a couple of points here. Just imagine if we had a tax break bill for the oil and gas industry that did the same thing, happened just to get out all of those entities I mentioned, and sat in a committee. And then it was brought out at the end of session. Oh my God, the rogue oil industry. Oh my God, they're purchasing the legislature. Oh my God, the sky is falling. We would be taken to task immensely if we had done something like that. Notice when you're in the majority, things help you. No op-eds, no editorials, no stories about SB 32 coming out of a committee, being dusted off and jammed through at the last moment. None of those. But I give you this. If that had happened with our industry, op-eds, the unfairness, big oil, the whole 9 yards would be a reality. So, nothing in a major publication in the state. But wait, there's more. Tom Steyer walked the halls on this bill, spoke to legislators. And I want you guys to really understand the seriousness of what I'm about to tell you, and that is, there is a rule that registered lobbyists cannot go on the assembly floor nor the Senate floor, because we would do what we naturally do. We would talk to legislators and attempt to get things passed. Mr. Steyer, I don't think he's a registered lobbyist. Fine, no problem. But here's a man who had a vested interest in a bill. While it was being debated and voted on, he was in the back of the assembly chambers. Now, most of the time, I'd say 9.99 out of 10, if you are a high-profile individual, you're introduced on the assembly floor. Shh, Mr. Steyer did not get introduced. Now, I'm not saying that Mr. Steyer was lobbying on the assembly floor, because I'm not allowed there, and I can't confirm nor deny that he was doing it. But he was there. And you have to look at what was the subliminal message here, or not. The bottom line is the bill passed. We could squawk about it, but the bottom line is we have to get our ducks back in order and go on the offensive ourselves. With that said, there was a bill, Assembly Bill 197, that in fact is what they call the Oversight Bill, but it provides and creates what they call a Joint Legislative Committee on Climate Change and Policies, and requires the California Air Resources Board to prioritize direct emission reductions and consider social costs when adopting regulations to reduce GHG emissions beyond 2020 statewide. Now that sounds pretty beautiful, but those of you who really understand regulatory, the legislative branch is to legislate. The regulatory branch is to implement. When a legislator writes up a bill and says, regulators take charge, find the answers, as opposed to regulators, we're going to take charge, we're going to find the answers, and we need your expertise and input. There's a whole miss there. And the miss is this. Regulators report to legislators. It's not the other way around. But when you provide power to a bureaucrat, there is no, and I mean there is no, none yet, zero. You can't even find any accountability. Because when you go to the polls, just as you did a week ago, you are selecting a candidate or candidates who are running for office. You don't know who the hell these bureaucrats are, but nonetheless, they're being empowered by the very people you elect. So it's supposed to be a bit of the other way around. With that, there was two more bills. Senate Bill 1383, methane reduction. We all want methane reduction, but the member couldn't quite explain his bill. And that's a problem. What does the bill do? Give CARB more sweeping powers to find the very things that we're asking to be done. Methane reduction, GHG reduction, black carbon. Now, the seriousness of it is if CARB believes that a tax increase is necessary to implement the goals of what this legislator wrote, so be it. Where's the accountability? None. You gonna fire Mary Nichols? Can't fire her, she's appointed by the governor. We can only fire elected officials every 2 or 4 years. There was a bill, Senate Bill 1387, I thought was kind of interesting. When you take on the pro tem, this was Senator Kevin De Leon, the pro tem of the Senate, who in fact decided that the South Coast Air Quality Management just needed three more state appointees. They needed 3 more on top of the 3 that they had so they could have a 40-60% majority at the AQMD level. It was also the classic battle between local and state governance, local and state powers. Local control was at stake. Needless to say, there were over 100 organizations in opposition to this bill. Needless to say that the pro tem had a battle on his hands. Needless to say, the bill got hit in the mouth and only garnered 30 votes out of 80, and it didn't pass. So that was one decent thing. It was one of the few decent things that happened in addition to our negotiations. So that was a quick and dirty recap of our legislature in 2016. Let me quickly cover that some of the most competitive legislative races were displayed this past election cycle. November turnout was a bit higher because of the Trump factor, district by district overall down. The Republican nominee, businessman, and reality television show did not win California, but the big question was what his impact would be, what would his coattails impacts would be. Right now, members, there are still counting votes in a few races. Assembly District 27 in San Jose, Ash Carla versus Madison Wynn, 52.5% to 47.5, close. Assembly District 40, Republican Assemblyman Mark Steinorth, 52.2% against his challenger Abigail Medina at 47.8%. Assembly District 60, challenger Ms. Cervantes has 52%. The incumbent has 47%. District 65, Sharon Quirk Silva, the challenger, has 50.8%. The incumbent, Young Kim, has 49.2%. So every vote does count because they're being counted to this day. Obviously, we're hoping on some outcomes. We're praying for some outcomes as well. But nonetheless, the process will be the process. Democracy will go on. Some candidates ran away from the president-elect, some ran toward him, some are paying for it, some benefiting from it. CIPA's direction next year. As I mentioned before, we play a heck of a game of defense. However, as many of you know, defense does win championships, but in politics, 1 or 2 losses, and you've lost the entire game. Too many losses for me, and I'll be selling groceries next year. Maybe one of you will hire me if I lose too much. Well, then again, you may not, but hell, you lost. What the hell I want to hire you for, right? But the situation is this. Next year, we'll have to sponsor legislation, prioritize and protect our assets, likely expand our coalition, fight to the bitter end anyone who dares to write the industry out of the script, and definitely we will be ready and prepared to negotiate, but given the momentum of our opposition, chances are the new left-leaning folks coming in will have a battle or have goals in their hands, but battles, that's for sure. Our opposition, they do not negotiate. It's all or nothing. They file suits against government, the private sector, and anyone. And based on our arguments of science and facts, they base their positions on fear, scare tactics, and guilt. Let me give you the reason that it's not productive for our opposition to negotiate. So, let's take the Sierra Club, or the Center for Biological Disease Diversity. If, in fact, they went on a bill or a policy, they go back to their funders, they go back to the grant writers, they go back to the members and say, we beat oil, we need more. If they lose, they go back to those same folks and say, we need more resources because big oil is killing us. So it's a disincentive for them to sit at the table and negotiate good policy that will be good for all Californians and have leading, groundbreaking pieces of legislation. So the point is, what do? When we don't band together, ladies and gentlemen, we provide an asset and a win to our opposition, who in fact have nothing else better to do but to sit around and say, you do bad, and you do bad. I'm gonna read you something here. The head of the Center for Biological Diversity was in an interview, and he was asked this question: were you hindered by not having science degrees in your organization, Center for Biological Diversity? His answer: no. It was the key to our success. I think the professionalism of the environmental movement has injured it greatly. These kids get degrees in environmental conservation and wildlife management and come looking for jobs in the environmental movement. They've bought into the resource management values and multiple use by the time they graduate. I'm more interested in hiring philosophers, linguists, and poets. The core talent of a successful environmental activist is not science and law. It's campaigning instinct that's not taught in universities, it is discouraged. So, ladies and gentlemen, you have just heard from the head of the Center for Biological Diversity saying that science and facts make no difference to him. Activism does. Suits do. So let me bring this back to us. If we went on the record and attacked the governor, filed a suit against the government, if not in defense, but on offense, and said the things that these folks get to say and get away with, we wouldn't have an industry. So since we don't have friends in certain houses, it's important for us to make friends in our house. And for you, Mr. Steyer, you hypocrite, you said you divested out of the oil and gas industry, but you just sold your assets. I would have had more respect for you if you had totally divested. But you sold the assets and now say that the very industry that made your living is now bad because you see solar on the horizon and that's where your next investment is going to go. I cannot knock you for investing, and I can knock you for being a hypocrite. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for not throwing anything at me. Thank you for not walking out. And I solely appreciate everything that you do and will continue to do. And just know, and I truly, sincerely mean this in my heart, it's okay to be in business. It's okay to make a profit. It's okay to give people jobs. It's okay to provide people with careers, and it's damn sure okay to provide for your families. Thank you very much. Now, they said that there was some Q&A time. If there's a question or two, I'm glad to answer. If not, I had a good time.
Thank you, Anthony. John Carruthers. I've worked in the California energy business for 30 years now, and I've seen us develop a system of environmental regulations and safety that guarantees that a barrel of oil produced in California has the smallest environmental footprint of any in the world, and I've worked in the world too, in many places around the world. We do it neat and clean here. It's a lot safer. On a per barrel basis, we have a lot fewer incidents here. I look at the hidden costs then of imported oil. When a ship comes over here, it burns about 5% of its cargo just getting here. Nobody in the NGO movements talk about those emissions. Nobody talks about the hidden costs in military of our children going there to serve. Now you're CIPA, you're not ExxonMobil. Why doesn't the California industry distinguish itself from those that make profit from this imported oil business. You guys aren't making the money, and you actually deliver a cleaner, safer project with a lot fewer emissions because of the reduced transportation costs to get to California. Thank you.
It's a very good question. Let me be since we're all family here, we're all family, so let's just have a little fireside chat. They don't give a damn. They don't. These are true believers, and their goal is to stop production in California, period. They don't care that we have no major interstate pipelines to and fro. They don't care that we have 28 regulatory agencies that we have to deal with, that our members have to deal with. They don't care that you're right and true that the safest place to produce is the state of California. The safest place, the cleanest crude, the most viable regulations are here, but they don't care. When you are on a mission, as many of the activists are, they could care less. How come we don't distinguish ourselves? We actually do. We distinguish ourselves between production and refining. We tell them that if it isn't, look, the demand will be there. Cars are like junkies. They have to have it. They have to have it. It's like this chain smoker. How come you smoke so much? I don't know. I'm okay. I just got to have it. So the bottom line is this. We need another force, all of you. One thing I have to give SEIU, the purple shirt gang, I have to give them credit. When it's an important issue, they mob into the legislature. They walk the halls, they knock the doors, they literally threaten and say, you will not cut this, you will give this raise, you will support this strike, or you will have hell on your hands. I don't know if it's possible, but if we just shut everything down for a day and no one could move, planes, trains, soccer mom, soccer dad, football, it would come to a grinding halt. But my point is, we need you in the legislature. Ladies and gentlemen, I've worked for a big city mayor. I've worked for a county assessor. If the mayor of Los Angeles received 11 calls on an issue, it was an issue. Can you imagine if all of you made a call on an issue? You would shut places down. And it's just one person. Your last name? Mr. Tatey and Mr. Brown and Miss Taylor. Sounds like a law firm. But if all of them made calls with all of you, the calls to action are important, ladies and gentlemen. We are literally fighting for survival. And given the new makeup, well, we got to put our armor on. Everyone knows not everyone, but some people know the scripture, put on the whole armor of God. Well, I got to put on 2 armors every day. Hope that answers the question. Not a good answer, not a good situation, but I hope it answers the question. Any other question? You guys want that lunch, don't you? Okay. We're good? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Have a good lunch.